You think that Gervonta Davis can make a comeback in 2026? I think so. I think it's just who he fight. Right now, if he was to fight a guy like Pitbull Cruz again, no. If he was to fight a guy like Rolly again, no. If he was to fight a guy like Ryan, no. The bare minimum of a guy that I would give him some type of credit of fighting and beating is a guy like Shaquille Foster. But if he fight another guy coming up, no. Right? And the spotlight is on Gervonta Tank Davis because everybody held him in such a high regard. Right? And what he did was he finessed the box in public. He got some checks. And he thought he was going to do that with the Jake Paul situation. And, access denied. Check revoked. So now he got to go back to the drawing board and say, damn, 135 got some lions. 140 got some lions. 147, nah, I ain't going to go over there. I ain't going to go over there. Is that Debo? Right? So like I said before, I feel like, if it's strategic, he could make a comeback. But he come back and fight somebody that don't nobody want to see him fight. You got to keep in mind, he hasn't done pay-per-view numbers since everybody's saying he's such a big draw in the sport since Ryan Garcia. Go check it out. You can pause this video, come back, go look. He hasn't done nowhere near the numbers that he did in that Ryan Garcia fight. So I'm just confused. Is he a star because of his athleticism and his talent, butts in seats, or just still being under that Floyd Mayweather umbrella? I feel like it's the latter. People are hoping that Tank can do something that he don't feel he can do. Right? He don't grow. He too short. Arm reach is not what it should be, especially when you fighting guys who know how to fight. Fighting a guy like Shaq. I could see Shaq going in there and doing the same thing he did to Fulton. But why won't that happen? Because Tank don't want to lose like that. Tank don't want to lose. Tank don't want to put himself in a position to lose. If he want to come back, and shake things back up in the sport, I will fight an Abdullah Mason. The winner between Andy Cruz and Murataya. At worst, the worst on the spectrum of them guys, Floyd Schofield. Go ahead, get him a check. Go ahead, get him up out the sport. Right? But as far as him doing anything with anybody at 140, I can't see it, unless, like I always say, unless he got a clause, he got some type of condition. A guy can't drink milk a few days before the weigh-in, and he also can't sleep in a bed. He got to have an air mat. If it's something like that, then I could see him competing with some of them guys at 140. But, to be honest with you, I just don't see it. I don't see him beating none of those guys. The blueprint to beat Gervonta is already out there. Guys are getting more confident, especially when they think about facing him. All we got to do is stay in the pocket, catch and shoot. We don't got to twist and turn in the ring like Frank Martin. We ain't got to do that. We can just stay in the pocket. Oh, I'm comfortable in my pocket presence, right? So the formula is already out there to beat a guy like Tank. But like I said, if he wanted to come back in 2026, and make his way back in the sport, change the sentiment of fans, I would say it start at 135 pounds. Go ahead and get Abdullah Mason up out of there. The winner of Andy Cruz Murataya, go ahead and get them out of there. Floyd Schofield, win a belt from one of them guys, defend the belt against Schofield. Schofield ain't shit for real, especially at a high level. And then start working your way up, calling them guys out at 140. But, at this point, I would compare Tank as that guy in 6th, 7th grade. He whipping everybody ass. At 140, them guys 9th, 10th grade, and they've been whipping everybody ass, since the start of high school. It's a difference. You kicking ass in middle school, and now you stepping up challenging guys in high school who've been kicking people in high school ass. It's a difference. And, all Tank has done is allow these guys to get more comfortable, not just under the lights fighting their style of fighting. You know, and I feel like the more that he lets these guys get in their groove, the more that he lets these guys get comfortable, it's going to be harder and harder for him to shake back, because these guys are going to be all around these divisions. You know, and you coming out here saying you're going to fight this guy, that guy, but none of those guys are the guy, you know, it's going to make yourself look bad all around the board. And like I said before, you know, if I was Tank, you know, if I was a part of Tank team, I would let him know, like, hey, take the Devin Haney approach. You know, this step back that you got from boxing, go ahead and get yourself together. But just know, when you come back, you're going to have to make a splash. You're going to have to fight a boogeyman. You're going to have to fight somebody that you wouldn't usually take that risk against. But right now, your stock is as low as it can be. Why? Because so many guys in the sport are growing and getting better, and you're falling behind. You're not the face of boxing. You're not the face of boxing. You can't hold up a division no more. At 135, we want to see Abdullah Mason now. Andy Cruz. We want to see those guys at the division. You know, we just don't want to see Tank. At 140, we want to see Keyshawn Davis. You know, Gary Hitchens. At 147, we want to see Debo. But as far as you having that spotlight to whereas you are the only one at and around your weight class making noise, that's no longer. So the only way to come back and make something shake is to go in there and make something shake against a worthy opponent. You know, opponent that has something to gain. You see what I'm saying? In a fight that you have something to gain. And like I said before, if you're not going to be able to do that, you know, it's going to be harder and harder for you to make a comeback, because all these guys ain't doing nothing but working on their craft, getting better under the lights, and making shit shake in your absence. So then when you come back, you're going to have so many obstacles against you. Ring rust, right? Ring rust is one of those things. You know, not being active enough. You know, active against tomato cans is different from active against, you know, top 20, top 30 opponents, right? And it shows when you step in there against a guy who's fighting at the same tier as you. You know, so like I said before, I would like to see Tank get in there with Shaq. You know, I feel like him beating Shaq, stopping Shaq, hurting Shaq, getting him out of there, you know, that's a hell of a statement. You know, you come back, first fight you going to fight Abdullah Mason. That's a hell of a statement. You know, even if you get a tune-up in Floyd Schofield and then come back and fight for one of them belts at 135, but you just got to do something different than you doing now.